Our next speaker comes from the Paul Ehrlich Institute in Langen, and Micha is involved in international activities of the Institute as head of Division Major Policy Issues and Coordination. He started at the Paul Ehrlich Institute with assessment of in vitro diagnostics and became involved in the definition of public health measures in the field of blood safety testing. For some years, he also joined the World Health Organization in Geneva as group leader for standardization of biologicals, and his current duties include the installation of an EU reference laboratory for IVD at the Paul Ehrlich Institute. Thanks for being here, and yeah, stage is yours.
Okay, thanks a lot for the kind introduction, and welcome back, everybody. And also thanks a lot to the organizers of this seminar, which is, I think, quite interesting, and I'm happy to participate. What I would like to summarize in my presentation are the expectations from my institute, especially in respect to Class D IVDs. Just to explain a little bit the background of the institute, why are we involved in the IVD regulation? This has a long history from the 70s of last century until 2000. We were responsible for national IVD approval in Germany, according to the drug law at that time. And this included also batch testing. And the markers which had to be approved by the Paul Ehrlich Institute were the blood screening markers and some congenital markers. And this was this regulation, national regulation, became replaced by the European approach in 2000 by the IVD directive. And also under the IVD directive, we play a role as a competent authority for Annex II List A devices. So this concerns IVD vigilance, and as a testing lab for notified bodies for Annex II List A devices, where another group performs batch testing for notified bodies. And in future, under the new regulation, the PEI will be the competent authority for infectious markers and blood groups, mainly or exclusively devices in Class D and Class C. And this will be the topic of my presentation, or the main topic. We intend to become one of the European Union reference laboratories for some devices in Class D. Just to share the background a little bit further, since the Paul Ehrlich Institute is responsible for biomedicines and vaccines, we are also responsible for vigilance of these products, and sometimes adverse events were reported, for example, virus transmissions by blood components or by cells and tissues. And some of these adverse events could be traced to IVDs, and then also regulatory measures on IVDs for the testing of this kind of products were introduced if necessary. Last not least, we are one of the WHO collaborating centers in the field of blood products and in vitro diagnostics. And one of the tasks is also to establish international standards for the WHO for in vitro diagnostics and international reference panels. And we are also a custodian for these preparations. So we prepare them, characterize them, then they are established by an expert committee of the WHO. And then we are responsible also for maintenance and delivery, sending out these preparations. And this is just to give you an impression, a list of reference preparation or WHO international standards which have been established by our institute, mainly Class D markers. Now, we discussed already in the morning the COVID-19 situation, and this also caused many discussions on a European level, where we also participated. And if we go on a global level, we see, or we recognize that quite many assays are already on the market globally. And there's a page of the NGO Find, which is located in Geneva, which lists all devices which are available for COVID-19. And of these more than 700 devices, already more than 400 are CE marked, including serological assays and NAT assays. And we discussed already in the morning that currently these devices are self-certified by the manufacturer. There is no real market overview of these devices in Europe at the moment, and different studies which are performed by different institutions clearly show that there's a huge range of different quality on the common market in Europe. And currently there are discussions on the European level if certain options should be taken, which are so-called derogation of options, which are in Article 14 of the directive. One of the options could be to include COVID-19 assays, or at least certain COVID-19 assays, dependent on the claim, into list A of the directive. But then we would also need common technical specifications, performance requirements. And if you look in the history, this took several years when variant Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease marker was included into Annex 2 list A. So it's a very cumbersome procedure. Another option would be that the member state applies for a different conformity route for these devices. But even this is not an easy approach, and time is running. And as you know, the regulation will come into place quite soon. It's, I think, common sense that at least the most critical COVID-19 diagnostics should be included in Class D, which includes also assessment by a notified body, and also inclusion of the European reference laboratories in the pre-market assessment and the batch testing of these devices. So for me, this is a clear example that with the new regulation, we have also a clear regulatory improvement, and this is a good example. COVID-19 assays are a good example because they have huge impact on public health measures decided in different member states, and their diagnostics are often the basis for certain measures which are taken in order to get the pandemic controlled. Now back to the IVD regulation. We heard already in the morning that there are risk-based classification rules for IVDs, which lead to different classes of IVDs, A to D. So there is no longer these Annex 2 list A and B lists, which have their own difficulties. And also the definition of IVDs includes now genetic tests and also companion diagnostics. What is also a bigger change is now there is a more stringent pre-market review of high-risk devices. This includes the notified body, of course, but also an EU reference laboratory once established, or in certain cases when no common specifications are available, pools of experts according to the scrutiny procedure. This risk-based classification, you are well aware of this, and just to repeat again, for Class D devices, notified body is necessary, and the reference laboratory, and the tasks of the reference laboratory are performance verification, so verification of the claims of performance stated by the manufacturer, and also batch testing. Now, one point is how which markers will classified into class D. And in the morning we heard already that there is rule 1, which is mainly responsible for class D devices, which defines that detection of transmissible agents or for blood transfusion, organ transplantation, and tissues and cells are included. Then also transmissible agents which cause a life-threatening disease or have a high risk of propagation, and agents where the infectious load is important in regard to the for the disease of control of the disease. And how are now different markers classified in reality into class D? What the classification group, which is still working on the classification guideline on a European level, took are the respective EU directives for the different products, blood transfusion, organ transplantation, and tissues and cell administration, and included the markers which are required for testing of these products, which is mainly HIV, HBV, and HCV. And only in the tissues and cell administration directive, there is also optional testing defined dependent on the status of the donor or of the recipient, so only for certain cases. And here CMV, EBV, HTLV1 and some parasites are mentioned, and these agents are also classified into class D because they are just mentioned here. I mentioned this because for me this is not a scientific approach. It's just a copy-paste approach, where the scientific basis is not really given, to my perception at least. Concerning life-threatening disease markers and risk of propagation, Ebola, Marburg, Lassa, and Waring-Kreutzfeldt-Jakob disease are currently discussed to be included, as well as SARS coronavirus and other viruses. And to my perception, SARS coronavirus would also include SARS coronavirus 2, even if it was not known when this decision was made to include SARS coronavirus. So SARS coronavirus 2, at least depending on the assay claim, should be class D devices. And for monitoring of infectious diseases, HIV, HBV, and HCV viral load assays are discussed to be included into class D at the moment. As I said, this classification guideline is still in preparation, but it's close to finalization, and it include also markers for blood grouping and tissue typing, which are already mentioned in the regulation itself or in the classification rules themselves. Now, going to the tasks of the EU reference laboratories, as I said already, the verification of performance claims defined by the manufacturer is one of the tasks, and also compliance with common technical specifications. Both tasks require a laboratory testing of the device by the reference laboratory, and it's also stated that the focus should not cover, of course, the whole performance evaluation, but should focus on analytical and diagnostic sensitivity, which makes sense, of course. And the notified body must take the respective report of the reference laboratory into account when decision about conformity is made by the notified body. For this procedure, for this testing, a time limit of 60 days is defined. And then after CE marking, batch testing is performed for the devices, for the class D devices. And again, a time limit of 30 days is defined for this task. To our perception, and I think this is also common sense in Europe, we will need quite a number of European reference laboratories in order to manage the workload, to reduce risks of work overload, compensate bottlenecks, and also to prevent monopoly situations if only one reference laboratory is available. And since there is a high number and also diversity of class D IVDs which have to be covered by reference laboratories, it's quite pragmatic to define scopes for individual reference laboratories, so a set of markers which have to be covered in the work program of a certain reference laboratory. And the current discussion, but this is also not finally decided at the moment, is to go for different groups of pathogens, be it respiratory viruses or hemorrhagic fever viruses or blood-associated viruses, parasites and prions and blood groups and so on. And reference laboratory can then apply for one of these groups in its scope, or can also cover more than one of these groups of viruses. And I think this makes sense because you need also some kind of specialization in order to cover certain markers, and you have to have also the experience with these markers before you are able to act as a reference laboratory. So what is needed for the verification of the performance claims? We need evaluation panels, so fixed panels of specimens which can be used for the evaluation, and they should be common between the URLs for the same scope, because of course the decision on the acceptance of certain IVDs should be based on the same scientific basis. And also international reference preparations like WHO international standards are needed in order to check metrological traceability of the values which are reported by assays. And concerning compliance with common specifications, these are the common specifications themselves are needed. Common specifications are kind of standards which define performance requirements a manufacturer has to fulfill for his device in order to fulfill the requirements. And under the directive, this is called CTS, Common Technical Specifications, which will be replaced by common specifications under the regulation. Now, if we look how is the status for these kind of standards, we come to the following picture. For the current Annex 2 List A and B devices, common technical specifications have already been defined because they were also needed for the directive. But for all the new markers which come which come under the regulation into Class D, these specifications are either in preparation, and to be honest, it's early stage of preparation, or even this process has not been started at the time being. So it's very difficult to check compliance with specifications which are not available at the time being. Now, an European reference laboratory should not work in isolation. It should work in a network of different reference laboratories. This is also defined in Article 100, which, by the way, only deals with European reference laboratories in order to assure harmonized methods, procedures, and common evaluation panels, reference materials, uniform interpretation criteria and reports, and which should also undergo a peer review system by related reference laboratories. And then there are also further preconditions which have to be fulfilled, which are some of them are defined in the regulation itself, or in Article 100, and more details are defined in 2 implementation acts, where also at the time being only draft versions are available. These have not been published so far. And you see, for example, ISO 17025 accreditation is a requirement which is now discussed, at least to be part of the implementation act, which was not defined in the regulation itself. financial economic standing, details for staff qualification are elaborated, and also preference criteria for selection of EURLs. Concerning fees, a transparent fee structure is required, and also the laboratories have to work on a no profit but on a potential cost recovery basis. But these two implementation acts are still not published, as I said. Now I think you feel already we are quite advanced in the timeline. November this year has been defined as the starting point for European reference laboratories. So selection and scoping and application should be done by this date, and then the reference laboratories should be available also for the new markers, but also for products which have already been CE marked under the directive and which need to be CE marked under the regulation at a later stage. So time is quite pressing at the moment, and many of the preconditions are still not fulfilled. Of course, we have also the transition phase for the directive, where certification is still possible for the next 2 years, and the certificates are valid for a certain time point. But nevertheless, in regard to reference laboratories, we are in a quite urgent situation. So I just continue, as I think I was interrupted with the further tasks of the European Reference Laboratory, which include advice and assistance to different parties, also development of common specifications and advice to state of the art. And I remember the discussion which we had in the morning. I will come back to this in the next slide. And also management of the network of national reference laboratories, which is another issue, because national reference laboratories should not be mixed up with EU reference laboratories in regard to the directive. Okay, concerning state of the art, we had a discussion in the morning. I could not participate because I could not unmute myself. But we have also some, I would say, some experience in Germany with this term. As you remember, we had governmental approval of IVDs under the German drug law, and for approval of the IVDs, we performed also performance evaluation and study in the laboratory and batch testing. But nevertheless, even for approved IVDs, we performed a regular re-evaluation of the devices, comparative re-evaluation, in order to determine the state of the art. And this is summarized in this graph. So we each dot represents a device, in this case for HBS antigen and so on. And then by statistical analysis, we were able to differentiate. In this case, sensitivity is analyzed, diagnostic sensitivity. We could differentiate assays which are less sensitive and more sensitive, and could group them into groups on a statistical basis. And then the decision was at this time for Germany to withdraw the least sensitive assays from the market, despite they had fulfilled state-of-the-art definition some years before. So they were several years on the market, but then they were withdrawn from the market. And the point which I would like to make is state-of-the-art is a continuous process, because there's a continuous improvement usually among IVDs, and especially among the IVDs which have important functions like the screening assays. And to my perception, state-of-the-art can only be defined by a comparative evaluation of all the devices which are currently approved or CE marked. And our proposal to the reference laboratories will be to come to a similar approach, but I have to admit this is not has not been discussed on a European level up to now, because even the candidates of the reference laboratories are not very clear at the moment. But this could be an approach to define continuously state of the art. Okay, I come to my last two slides. I think I I think you got aware there are different gaps which have to be filled, and the timeline is quite urgent. So the finalization of the implementing acts and the publication of these acts is necessary. The final scopes for individual EURLs are really necessary. You cannot prepare to become a reference laboratory if you are not sure which markers you have to cover. The application procedure, this is a formal procedure, has to be defined, and also the selection and designation by the European Commission is, at least to us, it's not very clear how this will be done. Then even maybe at least as important as an individual reference laboratory is also the network, because I think only in a network you can come to good decisions and conclusions. And on performance evaluation or performance verification, you need evaluation panels, you need to harmonize procedures and criteria and the review system. And this has also not been started, these discussions. And it's trivial, but it's a big issue. In order to assure compliance with common specifications, you need these specifications defined for many of the, still need them defined for many of the Class D devices. So my conclusions for COVID-19 IVDs, I summarized the situation on the common market a little bit. For me, it's another eye-opener for limitations of the IVD directive. I think such an important device, or important for health measures, should not be without any outside control. Concerning risk-based classification of IVDs, this is a very good approach. It's more flexible than the lists, and but there is a question of if all markers which are currently discussed for inclusion into Class D, if this is really scientifically justified. For the EURLs, the role in conformity assessment for Class D, I think it's definitely an improvement. Independent testing of these devices, but for this purpose also the network has to be defined. National reference laboratories role, I didn't go into detail, has not been defined at all, and common specifications, I mentioned it already several times. With this, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I'm happy that I was interrupted only once, because I was afraid every 5 minutes my mobile will stop working here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Micha. Right now, there are no questions in the chat. So maybe...
I think that there is one from Robin related to ISO 17025 accreditation for EURLs.
Yeah, this is a requirement which, to our knowledge, potential EURLs do not fulfill, including the Paul Ehrlich Institute, because we have a different procedure. We have the ZLG in Germany, which is responsible for assigning the status as a laboratory under the directive at the moment. We are working on getting this accreditation. I'm not aware of any other candidate laboratory which has this accreditation at the moment.
I mean, from a point of view of the yeah, we need to choose the right terms. From the hierarchy of the level of designation, I mean, the accreditation is clearly below the designation from its intrinsic value. I hope I do not offend somebody, and I hope I express this correctly, but the designation is the thing that counts. Also, notified bodies, they are designated, and they are the accreditation for ISO 13485 under the national accreditation schemes is something else that has only indirectly to do with the designation. So I think probably this is not necessary to have it, but
But Michael, can I jump in there? I mean, notified bodies have to have quality systems in place as part of their designation too. In a sense, they have to show that they have management of everything they do.
Mm-hmm.
My concern is that having run labs worked in reference labs and diagnostic labs and all sorts of medical labs during my life, I have found that some of the most unreliable results have been generated from national reference labs who haven't got quality systems in place. So I understand the requirement for some sort of quality systems, and whether it's 17025 or 15189 or even 9001, I just think it is a fairly critical aspect because you know, you're making judgments on Class D devices with this, and I just know that just because you have a status of a reference lab doesn't mean you do things consistently well, you know, and routinely well.
It depends. I think it depends a lot on the geography. But from your point of view, internationally, you are right.
But I'm even talking like when I was in Australia, we had some of the routine diagnostic labs operated in a much better quality way because they had to be accredited than the reference labs in the major cities. You know, I know that's now it's changed, but that was 12 years ago. That was the case. It's just an observation from real life.
Micha, are you with us? Can you hear us?
I'm back. Sorry. I have to apologize. Sorry. I'm back.
I'm just being a bit controversial, Micha, so sorry about that.
No problem.
In fact, I really like that discussion, to be honest. You know that notified bodies do not have to be accredited. They have to be notified.
Yep.
When we work as a certification body, of course, we have to follow 17021. That's where we are accredited against. So this is the standard for accreditation for a company using to actually assess the quality management system of medical device manufacturers. So this is 17021, and that's for accredited certification bodies. Notified bodies, of course, we have to have a quality management system, but this is assessed in a very specific way by the competent authority itself.
Yeah.
It's not by an accreditation body. So I assume that the formal requirements will mirror 17025 for the quality management system, but I think that it might not be necessary actually to have an accreditation according to 17025 for a reference laboratory.
I fully agree. And yeah, I fully agree. And if you have a look at the regulation, many elements of 17025 are listed as requirements anyhow. So it's only the formal accreditation which is under discussion and which caused much confusion. But yeah, how to say, the representatives of the European Commission are quite rigid in this respect.
Mm-hmm.
Seem to be quite rigid. I'm not sure if the final word has been said up to now, but it appears to me at least.
I have a question related to new diseases, new viruses, new markers, and this definition. What I said with this example of related to this example of COVID this morning in my presentation. Is there something foreseen that there is a kind of an adaptive scheme that even though we have a new classification system, it could be that products get to the market and that probably or maybe not immediately classified into the right class because of the status of simply having this disease developing. Is there something that is foreseen to make, for example, a pandemic declaration of WHO a decisive element in up-classifying in order to ensure the right scrutiny on those tests? Or how would that go in future?
it would go in the formal way is on request of a member state. A certain pathogen can be classified, and then this is done by the respective medical device coordination group. Finally, I think there is no how to say, there's no way, let's say, defined for pandemic situations. Maybe this COVID-19 exercise will open the eyes a little bit that something like this should be included, but of course it's very difficult to include it in the regulation itself now. But there should be a way how to deal with pandemics which are just appearing, because we cannot lose too much time. And I also wanted to discuss in the previous discussions, but I couldn't unmute my microphone. Also the possibility to, in the very beginning, to use in-house tests, and I think is a very important element, even if the first CE marked assays become available, because at least for COVID-19, these are self-certified assays, and there are quite a number of assays on the market, also NIT assays, which are not state-of-the-art, to use this term again, and there are in-house assays which are more sensitive, because there was immediately a common protocol of WHO, which was elaborated by the Charité in Berlin, which was globally available, and following this protocol, everybody could more or less easily establish his own device until the commercial assays of good quality become available.
I would also like to ask the question concerning the COVID tests as well. Knowing that the COVID tests, which are currently self-certified tests, and in 2 years from now on, it will become as Class D devices, it means that the legal manufacturers who would like to update their technical documentation and their clinical evidence would like to have already some common specification for it, which are not available right now. Is it a working group working on that? I know that the WHO already implement for the emergency use listing some guidelines on the requirements in terms of number of samples to use, what is need to be provided in terms of analytical performance. Is it something which is going on that?
Yeah, it's ongoing at the moment. So the IVD technical group of the European Commission is working on a draft common specifications which can be used at least under the IVDR, even if it cannot be used at the time being under the directive. But this is a work in progress. It's not finalized, but respective efforts are undertaken currently.
Is there any transparency so that we can see what's happening there and what the timelines are to release drafts or final versions of those common specifications?
Yeah, to my knowledge, but I'm also not directly involved in this. Currently, the competent authorities have been asked for their expectations, and so different numbers of positive, negative specimens and so on have been collected, and I think the work did not progress further up to now. But there's a working group on this. Somebody else from PI is member of this, but I'm not aware of the details, to be honest. I don't think there's a draft version available already.
Related to this process that would be in place with the IVDR, to where a member state could then request the up classification or the correct classification for new agents that are coming up. Is there a kind of is there an idea how long this process could take, and are there any means foreseen to accelerate this?
Yeah, Michael, it's a difficult question because this is future. I'm always try to be optimistic that it's not based on the past experience, and of course I hope there will be a faster procedure in future compared to the directive procedures, but I'm not aware of a real, let's say, defined timelines and so on.
Because this should be one of the lessons learned from COVID.
Definitely, and I think there will be different conclusions from COVID-19 experience, and hopefully this will lead to some approaches which are much faster than approaches used in the past.
Related to the process, when PI is working with or doing the reference lab testing for notified bodies, I mean the process is described. I mean the rules are set in the IVDR, but I mean from a point of view of capacity, is there an idea how many URLs are needed and what the capacity or whether the capacity that is foreseeable would be able to cope with the demand of the market?
Yeah, this is a burning question also for us, but we are not really aware of plans. First of all, how many candidates will be available, because even this is not transparent at the moment between different member states, and also per scope, how many reference laboratories will be notified or assigned reference laboratory status. At PI, if we would become a reference laboratory, at the moment we are more afraid about too much workload compared about not having too much to do. This is definitely a message which I can give, but there is, to my knowledge, there is not a real plan behind this EU reference laboratory assignation.
Yeah, because I mean this would be one of the lessons learned out of the MDR transition. I mean this will the MDR is just the little brother of what will come with the IVDR related to this missing capacity. I'm just a bit afraid if also you as the German representative reference lab has not more in information or I would have loved to hear you very enthusiastically say yes, everything we get it done, but obviously.
No.
Obviously, there will be a big problem once this IVDR will be in force.
Yeah, I cannot more than agree. I have the same concerns. Yeah.
But in the end, it's in the responsibility of the authorities and the ones making the laws to make sure that there is sufficient capacity and notification of reference laboratories. I do not think that we need to hesitate here or fear anything, because in the end they need to find a solution, because the pressure is not on the side of the manufacturers, it will be on the side of the patients and the physicians who would like to have diagnostic results. And I don't think that I think we should make aware to the legislation and to the responsibles over there in Brussels that time is running and that there need to be solutions for the manufacturers. Otherwise, we won't have products for the public. Yeah.
Sebastian, this is what we are doing since years in close how to say it, whenever there is a possibility to talk to representatives of commission or expert groups. This is something we do since years without really getting answers that we expect, even on a level of the national competent authorities. You see evasive answers, and you don't get a real answer. And when you see what happened with the MDR, I mean, on the political level in Brussels, in my opinion, everybody has been happy that there is this COVID issue, because this allows to push back this MDR with an argument that nobody does lose its face. and you can push back the MDR 1 year. This is my personal opinion, my personal impression. But I don't think, or I don't hope, that there will be another COVID or another problem that could be used to save the face for the IVDR. For the IVDR, we are now 2 years before the D date for IVDR. If there is something decided and the plan made, it should be made today, not waiting for another thing which could allow to push this back. So if there is no capacity, we are going on the iceberg.
So if there are no comments on that, I think we should move on.